Hello again, YouTube family. Thanks for joining me on this video. As you can see by the image to my left, this is dealing once again with Candace Owens, one of the more recent darlings on the right, because they enjoy using her to try and denounce racism and white supremacy and things like that, and she's willing to do and say whatever for handsome paychecks. On this instance, she was on Tucker Carlson's show to discuss the outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial, as I'm sure it surprises no one who's watching this show, whether you're someone of the left, right, middle, or wherever. They were not happy with the outcome of the police officer who murdered a man getting convicted on all three charges. And I'm going to break this down in pieces. We'll start off with the first video segment here now, and away we go.
Consider a murder case through the lens of politics. When you get to that point, haven't you already given up civilization?
Well, that's correct. And what we're really seeing is mob justice. And that's really what happened with this entire trial. This was not a trial about George Floyd or Derek Chauvin. This was a trial about whether the media was powerful enough to create a simulation and decide upon a narrative absent any fact.
So there you have Tucker Carlson saying that they're considering this murder, having to consider this murder case through the lens of politics. And even though this murder case was highly politicized on both the Democrat and Republican sides, it was still a court case that was decided by lawyers with a presiding judge and a jury. And he talked about giving up civilization, which is absurd. Candace Owens agreed with him because she's on his show to agree with him. That's what she gets paid for. Her comments were, we're seeing mob justice. This was not a trial about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. This was a trial about whether the media was powerful enough to create a simulation and decide upon a narrative absent any facts. Which, if you watched any of the trial whatsoever, you understand there were a great deal of facts that were released in the trial over this time period. The news media have plenty of facts that they've been putting out regarding this incident for a long time. And I mean, over the last year, the media has been putting out plenty of facts about in the case, and you had plenty of witnesses around it, witnesses that witnessed the execution of Floyd on the side of the road. You had the worker at the store. You had fellow police officers who testified. You had the expert witnesses. So the idea that this is absent of any facts is absurd. And what Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are doing here is gaslighting their audience, which is nothing new for Tucker Carlson.
Whether it was powerful enough to repeat showing and talking about a 9-minute clip that came from somebody's cell phone without adding any context, without showing the full police video, which they could have released. They refused to release the full body cam, which would have added more clarity to the fact that the media was lying.
And there you have the clip of Candace Owens talking about it's a 9-minute clip that came from somebody's cell phone. Without adding any context. What context are you going to add to that? Without showing the full police video, they refused to release the full body cam, which would have added clarity to the fact that the media was lying. But she doesn't exactly say what the media was lying about. And that's hence how we get the way she talks constantly. Is this very vague. The media was lying. Yeah, what were they lying about? Please expound on that. And how is a video shot on a cell phone any better or worse than a video shot with a body cam? It's a video of what happened. You had somebody standing there videoing this police kneeling on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes. If you had that from the perspective of a police-worn camera, what clarity is that going to add, other than the fact that, yes, he was kneeling on the guy's neck for nearly 10 minutes?
Was a man who was just getting his life together. He was a good member of society, and he got mixed up because a racist white police officer had it out for him and killed him. All of that fell apart. All of the facts came out, and all of that fell apart. We now know, of course, that he had enough fentanyl in him. It was 3 times the lethal dosage. 3 times.
And in that clip, Owens is claiming that the media was portraying George Floyd as a man who was just getting his life back together. He was a good member of society, and he got mixed up because a racist white police officer had it out for him and killed him. All of that fell apart. All of the facts came out, and we now know he had enough fentanyl in him, 3 times the lethal dose. And again, if you watch the trial and listen to the witnesses who expounded on that, because the defense absolutely did try to use he had drugs in his system, so therefore the drugs caused his death, not the guy kneeling on his neck for almost 10 minutes. And it was blown up in court. The defense could not come up with a defense that worked with that, but she is on TV, on Fox News, on Tucker Carlson's show, talking to his audience because they believe it. They believe it from the get-go, and so it works for them, and I assume that's why she's putting it out on that show. I mean, she was bringing up this whole thing that the media portrayed it as this racist cop had it out for George Floyd, which is not the case. And I mean, by all means, link in my video in the comments if there is a link to a media outlet that was portraying this as some racist cop that had it out for George Floyd. The issue is police brutality and the way police don't give a damn about other people's lives, particularly people of color, people in the minority community. And they will kneel on your neck till you're dead and not think twice about it. At least leading up to the George Floyd killing. Hopefully, now, an officer would think twice before doing that exact thing. But as we've seen constantly while this trial was going on, they have no problem pulling out their guns and killing people. And claiming that all of the argument that on George Floyd fell apart. People weren't trying to make him out as a pillar of the community. It was widely reported throughout news media that he had a lifelong issue with substance abuse, at least through his adulthood. He was an athlete when he was younger. I mean, the dude's like 6'7", and he has pain. He was taking fentanyl, which is an opioid painkiller, opioid. And no, people weren't portraying him as some angel. They were portraying him in actual light as a human being who had his pluses, his minuses. He had his flaws, and that doesn't give anybody the right to kill him. And that's what seems to be lost on Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson as they discuss this.
And the reason why the Democrats are happy is because they realize, of course, the media supports them, and now means the Democrats can get whatever they want because they can create a narrative and then they can treat people like pawns and get them to basically say, if we don't get what we want, we will riot, we will loot, we will send these people out like soldiers to destroy your neighborhood.
And there, Candace Owens is saying that the reason why the Democrats are happy is because the media supports them. And now means the Democrats can get whatever they want because they can create a narrative and they can treat people like pawns and get them to basically say, if we don't get what we want, We will riot, we will loot, we will send these people out like soldiers to your neighborhood to destroy your neighborhoods, which is absurd. I mean, this is a narrative getting pushed on right-wing media an insane amount, that Democrat politicians support rioting and looting. And I will say it again, I'm sure I've said it on some previous episode of this show, that there is no Democrat in elected office who is supporting rioting and looting. Nobody has ever supported that. Nobody has ever told people they should go out and riot and loot. And it's absurd. I mean, Candace Owens is constantly making ridiculous, absurd claims, and she depends on logical fallacy and ignorance for her to be able to make points. That's the gist of her grift on the right wing, where she has been making her money of late. And this is a video with some breaks in it to discuss.
More to the point, there are a lot of people sitting behind, Trump voters sitting behind bars right now, have been for months, charged effectively with trespassing. We're not speculating, we've seen the charges. No Republican in the Congress stands up for them.
Right now, there's
Tucker Carlson is saying there are a lot of Trump voters sitting behind bars for trespassing. And even though criminal trespassing is part of what they are in there for, they are not in just for trespassing. There's many other things. I mean, he is gaslighting his audience again there, trying to say that all they're in jail for is trespassing. Not true. Not true. There was an insane amount of guns found, explosives. You had people with zip ties who planned on kidnapping members of Congress. You had all kinds of insanity going on in those riots.
There's a pandemic of ignorance in this country, and that is only allowed to fly because we also have a pandemic of cowardice in this country, okay? So we have people that are purposefully putting out a bunch of ignorant claims, and then we have people that are too cowardly to stand up and say, you know what, this is wrong.
And there, Candace Owens is talking about there's a pandemic of ignorance and a pandemic of cowardice. I mean, there's a pandemic of ignorance, and we're seeing it on Fox News. We're seeing Tucker Carlson play it out right here on this show. She's saying that we have a bunch of people putting out ignorant claims and people too afraid to stand up and say that this is wrong. And yeah, you have somebody right here on Tucker Carlson's show putting out ignorant claims that are completely devoid of reality, devoid of fact, trying to gaslight the audience. And this is why so much of our population is misinformed, because they watch this.
They bring up Maxine Waters inciting violence. I'm so old, Tucker, that I remember when a man said march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol, and that was considered an incite to violence, right?
And there she was talking about Maxine Waters inciting violence. And she makes this comment, I'm so old, Tucker. I'm so old. I remember a few months ago. I'm so old, Tucker. I remember when a man said, march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol, and that was considered inciting violence. And I want to be clear, certainly if you're a Fox News viewer who viewed this and believed this garbage, that Donald Trump did not at all say to march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol. He was constantly using fighting words in the speech that led up to the inciting of the, as he incited the January 6th riots. Donald Trump absolutely incited the riots. And it is absolutely insane of her to attempt to rewrite history a few months after it happened. And she made that comment, I'm so old, Tucker. I'm 30, 31, whatever she is. I'm so old. I can remember a few months ago Insanity.
Look at what Maxine Waters says. No one in the media is condemning these remarks. That same media that condemned Trump and his supporters for weeks on end is now defending Maxine Waters. And we both know this is not the first time that Maxine Waters has incited violence. Don't forget, rush down. If you see a Trump supporter, you got to rush him down in the restaurant.
And there she's talking about Maxine Waters again. Says the same media that condemned Trump is defending Maxine Waters. This is not the first time Waters has incited violence. If you see a Trump supporter, you've got to rush them down in a restaurant. And again, she's gaslighting the audience of Tucker Carlson, because that is not what Maxine Waters was saying. Maxine Waters was encouraging people to protest, and the comment she was referring to before was Maxine Waters talking about confronting right-wing politicians who are in elected office to get them to support the correct things, saying to not let them be comfortable when they're in public. And some people agreed with what she said. Some people lambasted her. There were people certainly on the left and in her own party that criticized her for making those comments, saying that basically if you're encouraging people to be inappropriate to others, you're fomenting the mess of you're just adding to the problem, basically.
And the idea of martyring George Floyd, the way Nancy Pelosi spoke about him, it completely forgives all of the trauma that he brought against his victims while he was alive. Imagine, Tucker, if you are one of his victims that is alive.
And in the last two pieces of that video, she was saying the idea of martyring George Floyd, the way Nancy Pelosi spoke about him, completely forgives all the trauma he brought against his victims while he was alive. Imagine if you were one of his victims that is alive. She was telling Tucker Carlson to imagine if you were one of his many victims when he was alive. And this is something that Candace Owens has been doing since the Derek Chauvin George Floyd incident occurred, is gaslighting people. And one, as I said, George Floyd had a lifelong problem with substance abuse. And that has nothing to do with the fact that he was murdered on the street, and that's what the trial was about. I mean, the only part of that has anything to do with the trial was the narcotics in his system, the fentanyl. There was a very small amount of methamphetamine in his system, which indicates that he had done meth within a certain period of time, but he was not, as the expert said, he was not high on meth. But this is a common trick among a certain part of this country, certainly the right wing, to attack someone's history, to vilify them when it has nothing to do with the issue at hand. And that's what Candace Owens has been doing about George Floyd the whole time, is trying to bring it up that he's a hardened criminal, a cruel, violent person. I mean, she brings it up here like, what if you were one of his victims? Like, he has this massive, violent history. And the thing is, George Floyd, one of his convictions, most of his convictions were on possession of narcotics. And most of the time, from what I looked, I ran down his rap sheet. And he was arrested and jailed multiple times for having minuscule amounts of narcotics. Less than one, I think it was less than 1 gram, or maybe less than 0.1 gram. I mean, he had minuscule amounts of narcotics, but if you are found to have any amount of narcotics on you, you can be arrested. And because he had been arrested previously, that's the cycle. If you've been arrested before, they're going to arrest you this time as well. Certainly in America, if you're black, you're going to have a higher chance of being arrested than if you're white. Just like if you're black, you have a higher chance of being stopped by the police than if you're white. The black community is over-policed. The Hispanic community is over-policed. And Candace Owens is making it out like he has this horrible history of a violent person. He was involved in an armed robbery. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. I think he spent around 4 years in prison and was released because, and they would not have released him if they thought he was a danger to society. The guy overall, I mean, like the guy that owned this shop where he was accused of passing a $20 bill, and I want to make clear the reason why the police were there that day was because it was believed that George Floyd passed a counterfeit $20 bill, and the owner of the shop made it clear in court during the hearing trial that normally he tries to deal with that internally to have his employees tell him, hey, I believe this is counterfeit. The owner said George Floyd was a regular who went in there all the time. They were familiar with George Floyd. They never had any trouble out of him. He was a nice guy. And so the owner was bothered by the fact that this young employee called 911 to report a fake counterfeit 20 rather than telling the owner or somebody in management who was familiar with their habit of, if there's a belief of a counterfeit 20, they deal internally between them and the customer because they deal with a lot of regular customers that they are friendly with, including George Floyd. George Floyd did have the armed robbery conviction on his record. He served his time, and if you believe in serving your time and paying your debt to society, then he did that. But because the right wing grasps for anything to argue on, they will grasp and hold on to that. And Candace Owens has been holding on to that since the George Floyd murder happened. And that's my video montage of Candace Owens going on Tucker Carlson's show for a ridiculous bit of gaslighting to his audience, because Tucker Carlson apparently does not care if his audience is well informed. He does not care if they get the information they need. And he certainly, as I did in one of my recent videos, doesn't care about doing news. Tucker Carlson does not do news. And thanks for watching the video. Please leave comments in the comment section. Give me a like if you like the videos, and please subscribe if you've not already. And you can ring the bell for notifications. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.